Well, good morning, everybody. So I'm here with Ed, and maybe some people don't know Ed, but Ed has been lecturing around the country for many years, especially about religious history and to do with the interpretation of the Bible, to do with God's providence in today's world. Also, Ed is almost an expert on the spirit world, and he has accumulated a great library of spirit world books. So I'll hand over to Ed and let him talk about some of the books and his interpretation and impressions of them. So over to you, Ed.
Okay, thank you, Mervyn, and good morning, everybody. Today we're going to talk a bit about various aspects of the spirit world. We know for tens of thousands of years people have understood there is more to life than just this physical existence, so many religions developed, and initially there was shamanism, where people tried to contact the spirit world for guidance, and then there were polytheistic religions where people worshipped many gods, as in Egypt or Greece or Babylon and so on. And then we came into the world where people believed in one source to the universe. And of course in our own present day there is a great deal of interest about the spirit world, and I suppose for the first time in history in our modern era we have many books which explain about this spiritual dimension and the spiritual world, which is often not really well understood or explained by conventional religions. So we'll have a look at some of the various books, and we'll talk about them, their content, and see how we get on. So this is the first book I'd like to talk about today. It's called A Wanderer in the Spirit Lands, and this is about a man called Francesco Cesco, and this book was written about 100 years ago, and it's about a man who he really despised religion when he was in his earthly life, and he didn't really think much of the priests of his day. He lived in Italy, and he thought oftentimes they were corrupt and just outward. Their religion as an outward thing, rather they had a lot of inner struggle and corruption. And of course he's very often right, but he lived a very dissipated life, and he was what would have been considered and still considered an immoral life, and he didn't really live for anybody but himself. And of course eventually he passed away after living a very...
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. So this is written when he went from the spirit world, is it?
Yes, this book was transmitted to the earth through automatic writing, where somebody takes a pen, a spiritualist or a person who's attuned to this, they take a pen, place it in their hand, and without their conscious effort it begins to write, and this book was transmitted through this automatic writing process from the spirit world. So it's about his life after he died, and at first he was in great despair because he found he was in the darkness. He was in a very dark place. He likens it to being in a room without walls, but you can't get away. He was confined to the area where his grave was. Somehow he was still attached to his physical body, although his physical body was in fact buried, but he couldn't get away, and he was here but in this very dark environment, and he was full of despair and suffering, really. And he was there for some considerable period of time. Of course it's difficult to say.
How did he find out the means to communicate with the earth, do you know?
How did who find?
How did, when he was in the spirit world, how did he then find out that he could communicate with the physical world?
Eventually he did. He was given help, and
okay.
He saw a bright orb of light approaching him in the darkness, and he was given help, and eventually he was able to move away from that situation of being in the grave. He had freedom to move, but he was still in a spiritual environment that was very dark and not very attractive. But there was one person on earth who really loved him, although he, as I say, he lived a very immoral life, a bad life, and he had always just put his own purposes before anybody else's. Although he'd lived like that, there was one person he met later in his life who truly loved him, and he loved her. And that woman's prayers helped him to receive the help in the spiritual dimension that he needed. So he began to find a way to communicate with other spiritual beings in the spirit world. And he met all sorts of beings. Some of them were quite still locked in their selfish way, and they wanted to drag him down into a very much lower situation. But eventually he was guided, and he began to realize he had to serve others and help others in order to develop spiritually, and that's what he did. So the book's about his journeys in these very dark places where he did his best to reach out to others who were suffering there and lift them up and help them and guide them. And eventually his environment began to change. He entered what he called the land of dawn, which was not completely dark anymore, but it was a land that was, he says, like the dawn, like just before the sun rises. He was in this sort of environment where it's no longer completely dark, and there is some signs of vegetation growing. So it was a step forward. So gradually in the spirit world, through his actions over many years, wandering around helping people in the darkness, he was able to grow. And eventually, after a long period of time, he was able to enter what he called the land of gold, go through the gate into the land of gold, where he was reunited with his parents who loved him, and he could go up to a higher dimension. So this is a very interesting book, and he could finally be redeemed after many years of wandering in the spirit world. So people often have the concept that hell is eternal, and that was a terrible threat for people, really, that they would die and go to hell and they would stay there forever. But actually God doesn't want hell to exist, and hell is created not by God but actually by human beings. This is very important to understand. If we create hell within us whilst we're alive, we actually take that hell with us into the spirit world, because you don't suddenly change when you die. You are what you are completely. And if you have lived a self-centered evil life, you go into the spiritual dimension with that frame of mind. So he went in, as I say, after a bad life, a self-centered life, a life of doing bad things, and gradually he repented, he could change. He was assisted with the prayers from the woman who really loved him on earth, and eventually, after many journeys in the spirit world, he could finally get to a much better situation. So that's a very interesting book to read. I can't go into every detail, but it's
So
worth reading.
The important thing was that it was kind of cooperation between someone on earth who really loved him.
Yes, that was a great help, really.
Yeah.
And of course his parents, who were already in the spirit world, they were concerned for him as well, and they would help from the spiritual dimension.
Okay. That's good.
So very interesting to read.
So
a wanderer in the spirit
in the spirit lands. Wow, interesting. Farnese. Okay.
Yeah, he was the medium who actually transmitted the book through automatic writing. So very interesting to read. It's worth a read if you haven't read it. And it's interesting to see there are many books like this from today. In our modern age there are hundreds and hundreds of them, and the interesting thing is they have common themes, so you can see there are common laws and common principles that do govern the spirit world. It's not just somebody's fiction or somebody's made up story. It's actually based on the real laws of the real spiritual law, the inner dimension of reality.
So it says this was written in 1896. When did the Spirit World book start to begin? Is it?
It was about then, really, when we got a tremendous interest in spiritual writings. As I say, you go back to in history in the medieval period, and it was a frowned upon subject, and the official churches would discriminate
so weren't
against
encouraged
people.
to talk about it then.
Yes, people weren't encouraged to talk about it, and it was all considered rather dubious under the heading of witchcraft, really.
Okay.
But of course, things are different today, and we can actually study and understand that that people with spiritual abilities, mediums, clairvoyants, and so on, they're not all witches. They're good people who are sincerely bringing benefit to others.
Okay, it's an important change, isn't it?
It is a very important change. And the next book I'd like to talk about is this one. It's called The World Unseen, and the person who transcribed it from the spirit world is Anthony Borgia. Again, it's a very interesting book. It's a slightly different story from the story of Franciso that we've just talked about. This man who transmitted this book was actually a priest whilst he was on earth. His name was Monsignor Benson, and of course he taught his church's doctrine, but his problem was that he had psychic experiences which were outside of church doctrine. So could he talk about those things, or should he stay with the church doctrine? Now, if you're in an established church and you start talking about your spiritual experiences, it will be a threat to your stipend. In other words, you might easily lose your job, and he was in that sort of situation. So he chose really to keep rather quiet about it. But eventually, of course, he went into the spirit world, and this book, it's very, very detailed, and it goes through his passing, his experience in the spirit world, what he did there, and how eventually he was allowed to transmit this book to the earth, somehow to atone for his, what should we say, his indecision on earth to reveal the real truth that he knew. So it talks, his death and his passing was not horrific or in any way a struggle for him, whereas we talked in the first one, The Wanderer in the Spirit Lands, that his passing was a horrible experience, and he was in this very dark and horrible place attached to his grave and his decaying body, and he couldn't move, whereas this man who had lived we could say a relatively good life, his passing was an easy affair. He was met by an old colleague, and he was escorted to his home in the spirit world through a very rapid transit from his place of death, where his body finally expired, and he was escorted by his old colleague into the spirit world, and he arrived in a very bright place, and he arrived at his home. There was a replica of his home, though very much more beautiful than his earthly home, and here he was a very happy man, and he could meet his old friends, and he could start to enjoy the many wonders of the spirit world. So the book goes on to describe how beautiful it really is there. You know, it's not a place where you're just as it were an abstract mind floating around in some sort of cloud-like or mind-like existence. It's a real place where thought creates reality. So if people have pure, good, holy, kind and loving thoughts, their environment will reflect that. So his whole environment was full of people like himself, good people, what we would call good people. And because the spiritual law is like attracts like. We're most comfortable with people like ourselves, aren't we? So he was with people with the same kindly disposition, practicing love, care, concern for others, and their whole environment reflected their inner spiritual state.
How did he find the means to communicate with the physical world?
Well, eventually, once he'd settled down in the spirit world, he still had this feeling of regret in his heart, and this was impeding his progress.
Mm-hmm.
This is the important thing to understand. He knew that I should have spoken the truth whilst I was on earth.
Yeah.
I should have revealed more about what I really experienced.
Mm.
And so he had regret about this. And he had written a book whilst he was on earth about spiritual matters, but only in accordance with the church's teachings. And in his spiritual house, in the spirit world, he found he had a library, and all the books that he had on earth were there, including the one he'd written.
That's interesting.
About the spiritual things. And of course he knew that it wasn't completely correct. It was according to doctrine rather than his real experience. So he had this awful feeling when he saw it, and of course regret. And eventually he was guided how to deal with this. He asked and he inquired, and eventually spirits from a higher level came, and they enabled him to communicate through this automatic writing again, through this person, Anthony Borgia. And he was able to transmit to the earth, through the mind of somebody else or the hand of somebody else, his actual real experience in the spirit world. And this somehow released him from this regret, and he could continue to progress in the spirit world. So very, very interesting book. He talks about all the different things you can do in the spirit world. Of course, eternity. People think, well, maybe I'll get bored. But you don't just sit around in the spirit world. You can continue with all sorts of activities. There are concerts there. People make music. People can go and study. There are libraries. You can go and learn things. And of course, in the spirit world libraries where he was, only the truth is printed. So he could read about the whole of human history, but as it actually was, not from a political or national perspective. So of course it's quite different in many instances. So he could do all of those things. And he talks about swimming in the spirit world. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
That you can actually go swimming, and he had the experience for the first time of going swimming, and he went with his friend again, who was his guide when he first arrived there, and you can go into the water fully clothed, and you can even go under the water and you don't drown because you're already dead, so you can't drown. But the water gives you a tremendous feeling of rejuvenation and refreshment, and you feel tremendously energized by that experience. So that's an interesting thing to read. And he talks about how they build things in the spirit world. So of course they don't have bricks and mortar as we do on earth, but they build. Building is done by the power of thought. So there will be people who specialize in building, just as there is on earth, but they will do everything with their mind in the higher levels where this...
What if you're not a builder? Can you attempt to build your house anyway?
Can probably do it, and you'll probably have to get some sort of guidance how to focus the energy in the spirit world.
Yeah.
So he talks about going to see how they built an extension to a library, and he said the builders would gather round, and then there'd be the head architect, and he would channel the energy from a higher level of the spirit world, and that would dissipate into the area where they wanted to do their building. And it would gradually take form.
Wow.
First, it's translucent. That's the interesting thing. So they put the building up, and it's like you can see through it.
Okay.
It's translucent, and the form is there. And then the head architect, he would check every single detail.
So it's like you can see the plan.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
becomes the building.
Yeah. And then it gradually solidifies once the head architect is sure that every detail is correct.
Okay.
The whole building solidifies, and there you have it. And he remarks about how the buildings in the spirit world, you know, if you look at stone buildings on earth, they're often very dirty, aren't they, and unattractive. But in the spirit world, they're as sparkling and as new as the day they were erected. So the stone is always clean, the roads are perfectly clean, there is no dust, you don't have to do any housework there because there simply isn't dust. So it is a fantastic world.
You seem to have building regulations there.
I don't know, they probably have some sort of way of planning their cities.
Yeah.
They probably do. And each realm has a head of the realm, head of that particular realm, a man of great wisdom and knowledge who may have been in the spirit world for many thousands of years. So that's quite interesting.
It sounds like a very interesting book. And I think I might have looked at it, but it's just very long, so it's quite a deep book, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
Do you know how long it took him to reveal the whole book?
I don't know how long it took to write. I would imagine quite a long time, because if you're writing and you don't have a typewriter, it must be
it was being dictated to the person.
Yeah.
Okay.
Quite a business, really. So I'd like to read an extract from this book, if I can. Is that all right?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll do that. Page 10.
You got us interested.
So this is the actual process of dissolution he talks about, passing to spirit life. I'll just read a bit of this. The actual process of dissolution is not necessarily a painful one. I had during my earth life witnessed many souls passing over the border into the spirit land. I had had the chance of observing with the physical eyes the struggles that take place as the spirit seeks to free itself from the flesh. With my psychic vision, I had also seen the spirit leave, but nowhere was I able to find out, that is to say from orthodox sources, what exactly takes place at the moment of separation. Nor was I able to gather any information upon the sensations experienced by the passing soul. The writers of religious textbooks tell us nothing of such things, for one very simple reason: they don't know. The physical body many times appeared to be suffering acutely, either from actual pain or through laboured or restricted breathing. To this extent, such passings had all the appearances of being extremely painful. Was this really so, was a question I had often asked myself. Whatever was the true answer, I could never really believe that the actual physical process of dying was a painful one, notwithstanding that it appeared so. The answer to my question I knew I would have one day, and I always hoped that at least my passing would not be violent, whatever else it might be. My hopes were fulfilled. My end was not violent, but it was laboured, as were so many that I had witnessed. I had a presentiment that my days on earth were drawing to a close, only a short while before my passing. There was a heaviness of mind, something akin to drowsiness, as I lay in my bed. Many times I had a feeling of floating away and of gently returning. Doubtless during such periods, those who were concerned with my physical welfare were under the impression that if I had not actually passed, I was sinking rapidly. During such lucid intervals that I had, I endured no feeling of physical discomfort. I could see and hear what was going on around me, and I could sense the mental distress that my condition was occasioning. And yet I had the sensation of the most extraordinary exhilaration of the mind. I knew for certain that my time had come to pass on, and I was full of eagerness to be gone. I had no fear, no misgivings, no doubt, no regrets. So far, at leaving the earth world, and all I wanted was to be away. I suddenly felt a great urge to rise up. I had no physical feeling whatever, but much in the same way that physical feeling is absent during a dream. But I was mentally alert, however. Much my body seemed to contradict such a condition. Immediately I had this distinct prompting to rise. I found that I was actually doing so. So very interesting, isn't it, that from his perspective of a spirit going into the spirit world,
So it was a moment of death.
yeah,
Yeah.
he didn't feel any discomfort, and he was met by one of his old colleagues, as I've already said, and he was escorted into the spirit world. Amazing. So death is not something to be feared in the end, but something we should look forward to. Not that we want to die prematurely, because we have a role on earth to grow and develop spiritually, but when our time comes and we ascend to the spirit world, it doesn't need to be something we're afraid of. We can be quite happy about it in the end.
Yeah, it's interesting that both of these people, they're not trying to, they want to inform people, they want to educate people, isn't it? They're not trying to put a spin on it. Might say this is what happened to me, or
Yes.
this is my story, but they want to try and explain the reality of what the spirit world was like for them. And
Yes, exactly so. Yeah. And the great thing is that it's a world of progression, that you can continually progress. And this man, Monsignor Benson, he also talks about hell as well. So there are places in the spirit world that are less than pleasant, where they're dark and gloomy, and they are the result of people's lives. It's not that God sends people to hell. They take hell with them from the earth to the spirit world. As you can take heaven with you. If you're a heavenly person, you will take heaven with you. So he visits those lands because people who were ministers and priests in this life on the earth, they still have the same desires to help people and minister to them in the spirit world. So they go, and not only priests, but all sorts of people who have that desire. They join groups of people who go to the lower areas of the spirit world, and they try to help people to grow and develop. And they say after a while you can look at people in the lower realms, which are dark places, smelly places, distorted places, and you can see from their appearance how they lived on earth, because it's reflected in their spiritual form, or in their spirit body, because we have a spirit body as well as an earthly body. So that's very interesting as
so
well.
you cannot hide your faults.
No, you can't.
Yeah,
you're seen exactly as you are. And sometimes people look rather hideous, according to Monsignor Benson. So of course they try to help those people and encourage them to change their ways. And he was very domineering and controlling at home, and all his family went in fear of him. But at the same time he thought he was a good man, because he donated large amounts of money to his local church, and he thought this will surely get me into heaven, something like this. But when he actually died and went into the spirit world, he found he was confined to a small stone cottage in a very dismal place, where outside there was sort of desolation, just a few odd plants here and there, but altogether not a pleasant place. And he was there in this house, this was his dwelling place, with no one else, and he was very angry and upset and resentful, because he thought to himself, the church cheated me.
This is not his reward.
Yeah, this is not what I expected. I've been cheated. So he was full of this resentment, and our friend Monsignor Benson, along with a couple of his friends, they had the mission to go and rescue people like him. So they would go to visit him in the cottage, and eventually, through their influence and through their love, he began to see sense, and he began to realise, yes, I was a selfish so-and-so on earth, and he realised that that he had lived wrongly. And he changed in the spirit world, and he could actually elevate to a much better situation where he lived in a nice environment and people with people around him, because he changed his heart towards others instead of thinking only of himself and hoping his donation to the church would see him through. He actually began to genuinely help people and love them and care for them, and he became a much different person, and his environment as a consequence changed completely. So that was really amazing, wasn't
So it's interesting that in the spirit world then you have the means to change.
There's no such thing as eternal hell, or your situation is such that it's determined by you. So you work, you grow, you change your inner self, and your environment will change with that, and you will be able to go up to a much more beautiful, stimulating, joyful area of the spirit world as you change. So we're the masters of our own destiny. God wants, of course, the very best for us. God wants us to live in the very highest heaven, but we have to be heavenly people to get there. So very, very important. So very important for us to know that hell is not eternal. There will come a time when the earth is become more enlightened, when hell will cease to exist. In other words, people will make the transition into the spirit world in a much better state than most people do now, and therefore they won't take hell with them. So hell is created on earth, remember that, and we take it with us, or we take heaven with us when we die, or something in between. A lot of people are sort of partly good and partly not so good. So very interesting to think about. Also, I should mention this book, he talks about how you travel in the spirit world, because you don't actually need bicycles or motor cars or trains or aeroplanes, because your thought governs everything. So if you want to travel somewhere, you focus on where you want to go or the person you want to meet, and you travel through time and space. There is really no time and space as we know it on earth. So your thought governs everything. So you travel instantaneously. If you really love someone, they may be 1,000 miles away from you, but you can meet almost instantaneously. So travel through the air or through the spiritual atmosphere, and you immediately arrive. So that's very interesting too. So he talks about his first experience of actually travelling in the spirit world, and what an amazing thing it was. How he was in one location and he was told by his friends, just focus your mind on that distant tree, and then he found himself to be there. And then his friends were still where they were when he started, but they could come instantly to be with him also. So very interesting. So time and space as we know it doesn't exist in the spirit world, but our inner self, our heart, our love governs everything. The people we love on earth, we will still love in the spirit world, and we will still be able to communicate with them. Very, very important.
Okay, well, I've just been recording with Ed about his knowledge of the spirit world books. We've been talking about A Wanderer in the Spirit Lands, that book, and then Ed was explaining about The World Unseen. And actually my camera froze at the end of this, so we couldn't make a conclusion. So I'd just like to say sorry that the computer froze, so you might see that the sound and the vision is a bit out of sync. But anyway, it was worth recording, and I'll leave it as it was. But this is just to say this is the end of part 1, and I'll go on to another part, and Ed will be explaining about more spiritual books and his interpretation of them. But I think it's been a very interesting part 1, and I hope you enjoyed it, and please look out for part 2 to be done soon, I hope. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. Bye from me and bye from Ed. Cheers.